I want to challenge something directly, a belief that has shaped almost every supplement decision you have ever made about your brain. The belief is this: cognitive decline is primarily about neurons dying, and the strategy is to protect the ones you have left with a strong enough antioxidant. Take enough resveratrol, enough vitamin E, enough of the right things, consistently enough, and you are protected. That model is not wrong. Oxidative damage is real, and antioxidants genuinely address it. But the model is incomplete in a specific way that has quietly cost people years of cognitive ground. And that incompleteness is exactly why well-supplemented, conscientious patients continue to decline. Not because the antioxidants aren't working, but because there is a second process running simultaneously that the protection model was never designed to see. Moringa, the plant that has been called the tree of life on almost every continent where it grows, is relevant to cognitive decline for a reason most people have never been given. That reason is what this video is about. My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance, 30 years in clinical neurology, and I want to be direct with you about something. The model I just described is the model I was trained in. It is the framework I applied with patients for a significant portion of my career. Antioxidant protection as the primary line of cognitive defense. It was the best available consensus, and I used it in good faith. What forced me to revise it was a pattern in my own practice I could not keep explaining away. Patients who were compliant, informed, running high-quality antioxidant protocols, and still declining. Cognitively slipping in ways their supplementation should have been slowing. The antioxidants were doing their job. That was not the failure point. The failure point was a second variable the standard model does not account for. Not damage to neurons, accumulation between them. An interference problem, not a loss problem. And once I started seeing the mechanism through that lens, every clinical pattern that had frustrated me for years became legible. That is the correction this video is built around. And Moringa is one piece of what addresses it. The honest brain exists to do exactly what I just described. Examine where the standard model has a blind spot and bring in the research that fills it. Not to be contrarian, because the blind spot has real consequences for real people who are doing everything right and still losing ground. If that kind of direct, evidence-based examination is what you have been looking for, subscribe. This channel is built for people who want the complete picture, not just the version that fits neatly into a 2-minute recommendation. And right now, type the word protected in the comments if you have been taking supplements specifically to protect your brain and you are still worried. Still experiencing the fog, the word-finding hesitation, the cognitive drag that should not be there given everything you are doing. Type it. Because what comes next explains exactly why. Here is the variable the antioxidant model is missing. Your brain's ability to retrieve a memory, a name, a word, a route you have driven 100 times, does not depend only on whether the neuron storing that information is alive and intact. It depends on whether the pathways between neurons are clear enough for the signal to travel. And clearing those pathways requires a biological process that runs entirely independently of antioxidant activity. Nerve growth factor, NGF, is the protein responsible for building and maintaining the neural architecture those pathways run through. From your mid-40s onward, NGF production declines. As it does, the infrastructure supporting memory access begins to degrade, regardless of what your antioxidant levels look like. Simultaneously, the brain's protein clearance system slows. Two specific compounds, tau proteins and beta amyloid peptides, accumulate instead of being efficiently cleared. They do not destroy neurons outright. They settle between them, creating neurochemical interference that buries access routes under residue the protection model was never designed to target. Here is how I explain this to analytically skeptical patients. Think of your brain as a power grid. The generators. Your neurons may be functioning at full capacity. But if the transmission lines running between them are coated in conductive interference, the signal degrades before it reaches its destination. The problem is not output, it is transmission. And the answer to a transmission line problem is not more powerful generators. It is clearing the interference from the lines. Research published in the journal Molecules in 2023 identified a compound isolated from tamarind pulp that measurably reduced tau protein and beta amyloid levels in neurological models, while simultaneously reducing acetylcholinesterase activity, meaning acetylcholine, the brain's primary memory neurotransmitter, persisted longer in the synaptic gap rather than being immediately broken down. That last point is where moringa enters the picture. Moringa supports cholinergic function directly, the same acetylcholine pathway that compound protects from the other side. But the reason that pathway opens up when the mechanism is properly addressed is that the interference suppressing it has been cleared. Moringa is one key into a lock. The full mechanism is what opens the door. Let me walk through the approaches built on the incomplete model analytically, not as a criticism of anyone who tried them. High-dose antioxidant protocols: vitamin E, resveratrol, CoQ10, alpha-lipoic acid. The logic is internally sound, given the standard model oxidative damage is a genuine contributor to neural degradation, and these compounds address it. But they were formulated to reduce one input into the mechanism without touching the accumulation side. The tau and beta amyloid interference continues building. The NGF decline continues. The transmission lines stay coated. The protection is real. The model it was built on is incomplete. Generic cholinergic supplementation. Choline, lecithin, phosphatidylcholine, all relevant in principle because acetylcholine is directly involved in memory encoding and retrieval. But supplementing the precursor without addressing the protein interference that is actively suppressing the cholinergic pathway is like increasing water pressure in a pipe that remains partially blocked. Input increases, throughput does not. Both approaches were rational given the information they were built on. Neither was a mistake. They were working from an incomplete map. The map was simply missing the most consequential variable. There is one more piece, a compounding factor specific to the interference mechanism that most people are unknowingly worsening. That comes next. Here is what happens when the complete mechanism is addressed, in the order that matters, not the order of the calendar. Day 1. The biology begins responding to the right target for the first time. NGF pathways receiving support they have been missing. Cholinergic activity beginning to stabilize. Protein clearance initiating. Nothing measurable yet. This is mechanical, precise, invisible. Before I continue, this sequence only holds when the intervention is built around the actual mechanism. A standard antioxidant protocol, however high quality, produces none of what follows. The transmission lines remain coated. That distinction is the entire point. Day 5. You are in a sustained conversation, a long call with a family member walking you through complicated plans. A discussion that requires you to hold multiple threads simultaneously. Names, dates, the sequence of decisions. And when it is over, you realize nothing dropped. Every thread stayed in frame from beginning to end. No nodding through confusion while quietly losing the sequence. No reaching for something that slipped. That is not a small thing. That is your transmission lines clearing the first undeniable external evidence that the model being applied is the correct one. Day 3 here is what made day 5 possible. You felt nothing on day 3. but NGF synthesis was already reinforcing the neural architecture those clearance pathways depend on. Acetylcholinesterase activity was declining, meaning acetylcholine was persisting longer in the synaptic gap, giving the memory system more signal to work with at every exchange. Tau and beta amyloid clearance was actively in progress at the cellular level, removing interference that had been accumulating for months, possibly years. Day 3 was invisible. Day 3 was the reason Day 5 was possible. Day 2, the hardest day. Nothing different. You could reasonably conclude it is not working. But at the cellular level, oxidative stress markers in neural tissue were measurably declining. The biological conditions for sustained protein clearance were being established. The person who almost stopped on Day 2 was closer to Day 5 than they realized, and would never know it, because they were looking for a feeling before the mechanism had finished laying its foundation. Day 7. You are reviewing plans made at the beginning of the week, and you realize, without reaching, without checking anything written down, that you remember every specific, the names involved, the order, the details that would normally have required a note. This is not improvement. This is access. Clear access to information that was always stored, now retrievable, because the interference between you and it has been substantially reduced. That is proof of the new model. Not just a result confirmation that the mechanism you were targeting was the right one all along. The transmission lines were the problem. They are clearer now, and that changes everything downstream. I applied the mechanism as a filter. Most products on the market fail it not because they are fraudulent, but because they were designed around the incomplete model and optimized for the wrong target. Here is what passes. First, it must actively stimulate NGF synthesis, not generic neuroprotection, not broad brain support. Specifically trigger nerve growth factor production to rebuild and maintain the neural architecture that memory transmission depends on. Second, it must contain compounds with direct, documented evidence for scavenging reactive oxygen species and reducing oxidative interference at the cellular level. The compound-specific evidence must exist. A label that says antioxidant support is not sufficient. Third, it must directly reduce tau protein and beta amyloid accumulation. This is the criterion that eliminates most options immediately. The transmission line problem. Most formulations were never designed to address it because the incomplete model never identified it as the primary target. Fourth, it must absorb and actually reach the brain in functional concentrations. A compound that is metabolized before crossing the blood-brain barrier is not a neurological intervention, regardless of what it contains. Delivery mechanism is not a secondary specification. It determines whether the first 3 criteria produce any effect at all. I ran everything I could find through that filter. One thing passed it. Here is what that is. Neuroprime is what passed the filter, and I hold anything I mention on this channel to the same standard I would apply to a direct patient recommendation. It is a liquid drop formula specifically relevant to that 4th criterion. The delivery bypasses the metabolic barriers that render most capsule-based formulations neurologically inert before they reach the tissue that needs them. It contains the tamarin-derived compound I referenced in Section 4, directly targeting tau and beta amyloid clearance, the step most products were never designed to take. It includes moringa, supporting the cholinergic pathway the clearance mechanism makes available. And it addresses the NGF and oxidative stress components through the same multi-target logic the complete model requires. The link in my description walks through the full biological case, the research, the specific compounds, and why this clears the filter I just walked you through. That is where the detail lives. Realistic expectations, consistent with how this mechanism actually operates. Most people report a distinct and measurable shift in mental clarity within the first 7 days. Full results accumulate over 30 to 60 days, which reflects the genuine timeline of protein clearance and NGF repair at the biological level. This is not a stimulant. The timeline is not arbitrary. It is what the mechanism predicts. I would not recommend it if the speed of the effect were inconsistent with the biology. 1 drop, sublingually or in your morning drink. 10 seconds. That is the entire daily protocol. 365-day, full money-back guarantee. If the results are not consistent with what the evidence indicates, you return it. No conditions. The financial risk is eliminated entirely. Type the word clear in the comments, not as a wish, as a commitment to the corrected model. Because the memories were not gone. The access was obstructed. And choosing to address the obstruction directly is choosing to trust your own brain again on the basis of better information. If there is someone in your life still operating from the incomplete model, taking antioxidants faithfully while the interference accumulates unaddressed, share this video. That correction is genuinely worth passing on. You came into this video with one model. You are leaving with a better one. That is exactly how this is supposed to work.